For our first project today, I'm starting with this crate that I thrifted for $4, and I'm going to give it a coat of Sweet Pickins Extra Bond. Today we're going to be using the Connie method. Extra Bond is a additive for milk paint that typically prevents heavy cracking. However, when you go in straight like this, it acts more like a glue, similar to using school glue to create crackle. And it also helps seal in the wood. So when we go over it with our milk paint, we'll actually get a lot of beautiful cracking. So I'm going to give this one full coat and then I'm going to let it dry. And then for our milk paint, I'm using the color Kent by Sweet Pickins, and I'm mixing it at a 1-to-1 ratio, 3 tablespoons of water to 3 tablespoons of milk paint. And I like to mix mine 1 tablespoon at a time until it's nice and smooth, really working out as many of the clumps as I can because it can get pretty clumpy. And I also like to use room temperature water. I do pack my spoon a bit when measuring because I prefer my mixture slightly thicker rather than thin, and I feel like I get better crackle that way. Then I'll set it aside for about 10 minutes or so. I like to mix in between waiting. Now I've already given it one full coat and now I'm going in with my second. This is where the magic really starts to happen and we get that gorgeous crackle. And after I apply this, I'm going to go over it with my heat gun just to speed up the drying process and encourage even more crackling. Now that that's nice and dry, I have my Madeline transfer booklet and I'm choosing this beautiful heron here in the center, and I'm going to start applying it by rubbing and slowly pulling back on that transfer sheet as I go. And these transfers go on so nicely onto this milk paint. Once I have my transfer fully applied, I like to go back in and really burnish it into the surface. And since this crate has seams, I'm using my X-Acto knife to carefully go along the edge there in the center. And then I'll take this little tool, it's kind of like a scraping tool, and press everything down into those cracks so the transfer is adhered well and it doesn't lift later. And I'm just going to continue placing transfers all around the crate, even piecing them together like this one here. And I'm also going to bring in another transfer book from Redesign. It's called Botanical Paradise. As I'm adding these transfers, I did want to mention my memberships are now live and I'm also an Amazon associate. So any products I have linked in this video or future videos, I do earn a very small commission if you choose to purchase through those links, but it doesn't cost you anything extra at all. And if you're interested, you can check out my memberships. I've added a few different tiers with some fun perks like behind the scenes content, early access, and little extras to make you feel a little more connected here, and no pressure at all. But I wanted to make sure you knew that they're there. And if you're new here, I truly hope you're enjoying this video so far. And if you're returning, thank you so much for coming back to spend time with me. One of the things I love so much about working with these transfers is how you can layer them. That's where the fun really comes in. You can build up your background, then bring in your foreground pieces and just create so much depth and interest in your design. And I know sometimes people feel like transfers aren't creative, or I've heard things like, oh, they just slapped a transfer on it and called it a project. But honestly, that's not how I see it at all. When you start layering, piecing elements together, and really building your own design, you're creating something completely your own. These transfers are just tools. They help bring your vision to life. And at the end of the day, it's still your design, your placement, and your creativity behind it. So do what makes you happy and just know that when your piece is finished, it's yours. Now that all my transfers are in place, I'm going to seal everything in with some Extreme Guard in satin. You could absolutely skip this step. It's just something I like to do before going in with my ink. I like to just bring you along through my process and what works for me. But this is going to seal in those transfers and it won't obscure the oil wax from settling into all those cracks and details. So when I go in with my dark oil wax, we'll still get that beautiful depth and richness throughout the piece. Then I took my vintage script stamp by Redesign, and I'm going to skip over a lot of this because it's quite timely to watch me do all the stamping, but I used my white ink, heat set it before going in with my dark oil wax. And this is by Sweet Pickins. Let it sit for about 15-20 minutes, wipe it all back. And so I completely forgot to sand first. It's just a step I like to do before going in with my oil. So I went a little backwards here. It doesn't hurt anything. Uh, you just want to make sure you wipe back any excess dust or debris from sanding. Then I went in with this really beautiful vintage antiquing paste. A little truly goes a long way, so I just applied small amounts with my finger and then blended it out with a microfiber cloth. I also like to keep my dark oil wax nearby just in case I need to soften or pull anything back if I get a little too heavy in areas. I'm gonna go a bit heavier along the sides and then blend everything out. And this is definitely the part where I take my time. This is what really brings in that aged look. Um, I probably spend more time here than any other part of the project, but this, along with all the crackle, is what really completes the vintage look. And guys, I think this is absolutely beautiful. I have to say, it's one of my favorites from my recent projects. And just look at all that beautiful crackle. I mean, I can't get over it. It's just so good. I'd love to hear what you think. What would you use this for? How would you style it? And what would you store inside of it? Since I use dark oil wax, this isn't considered food safe for direct contact. If you need something food safe, you could use a beeswax finish instead. All right, for our second project today, I'm starting with this drawer that I thrifted years ago, and I'm going to begin by removing these slats. It looks like an old silverware or utensil drawer, but I want to turn this into a shelf. So I'm marking where I need to cut the slats, along with that wooden, black wooden piece you see off to the side. That actually fits almost perfectly. I'm planning to reuse these slats along the top and the bottom, so they'll cover up those areas where the dividers were attached. And if you look all the way over to the left, that slat was going at quite a drastic angle. Uh, at first, I was going to try and use this as it was and realize that I needed to do something completely different with it. And so now I'm taking everything over to my scroll saw and cutting it. And that third piece worked out perfectly. I was able to cut it down to finish off both the top and the bottom. I was so happy that I didn't have to dig through my stash or find anything else to make that work. And yes, I have my scroll saw on the floor. In my craft room, I do everything, from cutting to painting to everything. For my middle piece, the length was perfect, but I did need to trim down the width. So I got that cut and then went in with my Titebond Quick and Thick wood glue along with some hot glue just for that immediate hold. I added my clamps to both sides and then set it aside to dry. And once I finished one side, I went and repeated that on the other side. Then I took out IOD's Trimmings 1 mold, and I'm going to begin by casting a bunch of this design here on the sides, just working that clay in my hands to warm it up, and then rolling it out into like a rope shape, pressing it into my mold, and then just using my thumbs to remove the excess. I honestly can't remember exactly how many of these I made, but I made quite a few. And this is going to frame out our shelf nicely and also cover up those marks where their drawer dividers were. And one thing that I love about this mold is the ends are designed to meet up, so you can place them right next to each other and it looks like one continuous piece. And so once I have everything laid out, I went in with my Titebond Quick and Thick multi-surface glue and started to glue down all my castings and trimming where it needed and pressing everything into place so there's no gaps. Next, I did a partial casting of this bow from my Regal Flourishes mold. And I also did partial castings for some corner details. So for the upper right and left hand corner, I'm doing a partial casting of the top of this design and then placing it right into the corner there. And from that same design, I'm going to cast each side of this little flourish type design. And then I wanted to frame it in a bit more where the castings meet the wood. There was a slight gap there, so I took my primitive mold and cast a bunch of these smaller trim pieces, and they fit perfectly in that space and really help tidy up the edges, making everything look more finished, almost like a built-in frame. Now it's the next day and I'm using some leftover buttercream colored chalk paint by Paint Couture. I'm mixing in a little layered chocolate by Debbie's DIY to create this really nice kind of taupey color that I love. I had previously added salt wash to the buttercream for another project, and I found that it stores really well. If you're not familiar with salt wash, it's a texture additive for paint. So it's a lot of fun to work with and perfect for creating vintage style finishes. And for this, I'm doing just one coat. I brushed it on first and then I went back in and stippled over it to get that lovely texture. Now it's the next day and I'm going in with Sweet Pickins milk paint in the color Pantry Door. And I'm mixing this a 1-to-1 ratio, 4 tablespoons of water to 4 tablespoons of powder. And I like to mix in between additions, and I let it sit for about 10 minutes. I do like my paint on the thicker side, as I mentioned previously, so I pack my spoons in pretty tightly. I'm going to apply 2 coats, letting it dry in between. As I'm working, I'm using my water mister and a paper towel to gently pull back some of that paint over my castings. I don't want it too heavy or settling in too much into all those low areas of my castings. It took a little bit to dry. With paint layers, I like to make sure I give plenty of time to dry. And I did some light sanding and then went over the whole thing with some liquid patina. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this isn't a necessary step. It's just something I like to do as part of my process. And then for my shelves, I'm using this paper that came in my Sonnets Makers box. And I had added a little bit of white to the shelves earlier and it didn't fully dry. So once I got my paper on there, there was some bleed through. But honestly, I ended up loving it. It added to that aged, time worn look that I was going for. A little happy mistake. And to apply my paper, I am using Pendart's decoupage varnish and glue. And that also came in my Rehatched Designs box. And I'm hooked on this stuff, guys. This stuff is amazing for decoupaging. And so here I'm just using my water pen to help tear away that excess. And it's also going to give it a more natural look rather than just cutting it with a pair of scissors. And if you don't have a water pen, you can just wet a paintbrush. That'll do the same thing. Then I just started adding some transfers. I used my Botanical Paradise transfers that I used earlier and also Vintage Roses. Those are both by Redesign. I added it looked like a hummingbird to the top. That's from my Flora Greca transfer booklet. Then I began decorating the inside of my shelf and adding some transfers there and some stamps. This is some IOD white ink, and I'm using their ephemeral stamp. And then from Redesign, I'm using handwritten notes. And I've never had this happen before. I always clean my stamps but I hadn't used this one for a while. I had previously inked it with black ink, and somehow that still transferred through, which I just found to be really interesting. Even after sitting so long, that black ink was still there. And apparently I hadn't cleaned it very well, but I ended up loving how that white looked. And then I decided to bring in a little black ink along the top just to tie everything together and just to add a little something extra. And again, I used my vintage note stamp for the top. Then I'm going to do some light sanding, going over my transfers just to add to that vintage look. I know a lot of people don't like to do that, but I go very light-handed over it. And then I'm going to seal everything in one more time with some liquid patina. Next, I'm going to go over my castings with Debbie's white wax. This stuff is so fun to work with. It's light and creamy and really easy to move around. I'm working it into all those little details and then wiping it back with a paper towel. And lastly, I went over the whole thing with more dark oil wax, let it sit for 15 minutes, and then wiped it back. And that is it. I think this turned out so beautiful. I really do love it, and I hope that you love it too. And as always, if you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button and hype me up if you loved it, and subscribe. I would love to have you here. And don't forget to turn on those notifications if you don't want to miss another video from me. Thank you for spending time with me today. Until the next one, bye.